नमस्कार दोस्तों, वेलकम टू बीइंग मैजिकल।
Have you ever considered lying to a friend to avoid hurting their feelings? What would Kant say about this? Let's delve into the complex world of Immanuel Kant's philosophy, specifically his concept of the categorical imperative. This moral law insists that our actions, no matter how seemingly trivial or grand, must be capable of becoming a universal law. You might be wondering, what does it mean for an action to become a universal law? Well, it's simpler than it sounds. It's the idea that if we can't imagine a world where everyone does what we're about to do, then perhaps we shouldn't do it. Let's illustrate this with an example. Imagine you're considering lying to a friend to avoid hurting their feelings. Perhaps they've asked for your opinion on a piece of art they've created and you're not a fan. It would be easy to lie and say you love it, sparing their feelings and avoiding an awkward moment. But here's where Kant's categorical imperative comes in. Before you tell that white lie, Kant would have you ask yourself, would I be okay with lying becoming a universal law? If everyone lied to spare others' feelings, what would be the impact on our world? The trust that forms the foundation of our relationships would crumble. Communication would be undermined, leading to confusion and chaos. And so, according to Kant's categorical imperative, even if your intention is to protect your friend's feelings, lying would be morally wrong. Because if lying were universally acceptable, it would lead to a society where truth is irrelevant and trust is non-existent. It's a tough pill to swallow, isn't it? But Kant's philosophy pushes us to consider the broader implications of our actions, not just the immediate effects. It's a call to act with integrity, even when it's difficult, even when it might hurt. Therefore, Kant's categorical imperative would argue that lying, even in this situation, is morally wrong. So the next time you're faced with a moral dilemma, remember to ask yourself, could this action be a universal law? It just might lead you to a deeper, more profound understanding of right and wrong. Is space and time an objective feature of the external world or a figment of our minds? Let's explore Kant's perspective. Take a moment and look around you. You'll notice objects occupying different positions. Some are nearby, others are further away. This arrangement of objects in space and their progression in time isn't an inherent feature of the external world, Kant argues. Instead, it's a product of our minds. In his critique of pure reason, Kant challenges our conventional understanding of space and time. He suggests that these concepts are not properties that objects possess in themselves or even relationships between objects. Rather, they are subjective forms of intuition that our minds impose on the sensory data we receive. Let's consider an example to illustrate this idea. Picture a fruit bowl on a table. The apples, oranges, and bananas each occupy a unique position in space, but according to Kant, this spatial arrangement isn't a property of the fruit bowl, nor is it a relationship between the fruits. Instead, it's a way our minds make sense of the sensory data we receive. The same applies to time. When we recall past events, anticipate future happenings, or experience the present moment, we are not tapping into an objective feature of the world. Rather, we are navigating a temporal framework that our minds impose on our experience. So, when we perceive objects in space or events in time, we're not accessing objective reality. Instead, we're experiencing a world as it appears to us, shaped by our own cognitive faculties. It's a provocative idea, isn't it? But don't let it unsettle you. Kant's argument isn't meant to undermine the validity of our experience. Instead, it invites us to consider the active role our minds play in shaping our perception of reality. For Kant, when we see objects arranged in space, it's not because space exists independently of us, but because our minds organize sensory data in a spatial framework. Imagine being in dire financial need. Would stealing then be justified? Let's discuss Kant's view on this. In his critique of practical reason, Immanuel Kant presented his argument on morality, which is grounded in what he called the categorical imperative. This principle essentially states that an action is morally right only if it can be universalized, meaning that it could be applied consistently across all rational beings without resulting in contradiction or societal chaos. Now let's consider a scenario where someone is in severe financial strain. They're tempted to steal to alleviate their situation. According to Kant, this action would violate the categorical imperative. Why, you may ask? Well, if stealing were to become a universally accepted action, it would inevitably lead to societal chaos. Imagine a world where everyone stole from each other. Trust would be non-existent and respect for personal property rights would be completely eroded. This would contradict the very essence of a harmonious society. Kant argued that moral actions are not defined by their outcomes, but by the nature of the action itself. Therefore, no matter how desperate the circumstances are, stealing would remain morally wrong because it contradicts the categorical imperative. Why do we find certain paintings beautiful? Kant has an interesting take on this. Delving into the realm of aesthetics, Immanuel Kant, in his Critique of Judgment, provides a compelling perspective on how we perceive beauty. According to Kant, the judgment of beauty is not merely a personal preference but is based on what he refers to as subjective universal principles. But what exactly does this mean? Well, essentially Kant proposes that while our taste in art or any aesthetic experience for that matter may be subjective, there are certain qualities that universally evoke a sense of beauty. It's like an underlying shared aesthetic language that transcends individual preferences and cultural differences. Imagine, for instance, a landscape painting. A serene scene of rolling hills, a tranquil lake reflecting the setting sun, and a sky ablaze with hues of orange, pink, and purple. Some might prefer abstract art, others might lean towards portraits, and yet most of us can appreciate the beauty in this landscape. This is because it resonates with those subjective universal principles Kant is talking about. It's not about the specific elements in the painting like the hills or the lake, but rather the way these elements come together to create harmony, balance, and evoke a certain mood. These are the qualities that stir a sense of beauty within us. Kant suggests that this shared appreciation stems from our common human capacity to feel pleasure in the harmonious interplay of the senses. It's not about intellectual understanding or a learned response, but an instinctive emotional reaction that unites us in our perception of beauty. So, when you find yourself standing before a piece of art, captivated by its beauty, remember that it's not just a personal response. It's a testament to our shared human experience, a connection that transcends individual tastes and cultural boundaries. Kant would argue that while tastes may vary, certain aesthetic qualities evoke a universal sense of beauty. What is the nature of reality? Can we ever know it completely? Let's delve into Kant's transcendental idealism. Immanuel Kant, one of the most influential philosophers in the history of Western philosophy, proposed a radical theory about the nature of reality, known as transcendental idealism. This theory holds that our understanding of the world around us is shaped not just by the things we perceive, but also by the structures of our own minds. Picture, if you will, a table. We perceive it as solid, tangible, existing in a specific location in space. But Kant would argue that our perception of the table doesn't necessarily correspond to the table's true nature. Our minds impose a framework of space and time onto the raw sensory data we receive, creating a coherent picture of a table. But this table is not the thing in itself, the ultimate reality behind our perception. It is a phenomenon, a product of our mind's interaction with the world. This doesn't mean that the table doesn't exist or that it's all in our heads. Rather, it means that we can never fully grasp the true nature of the table because our perception of it is shaped by the subjective forms of intuition imposed by our minds. The table as we perceive it is not the ultimate reality, but a representation shaped by our cognitive faculties. This might seem a bit counterintuitive, but it's a fundamental aspect of Kant's philosophy. He argues that we can never directly access the noumena, the things in themselves. All we can know are phenomena, the things as they appear to us. This perspective has profound implications for how we understand the world. It suggests that our perception of reality is not a mirror reflecting the world as it is, but a construction shaped by our minds. It reminds us that there is more to the world than meets the eye, and that our understanding of reality is always, in some sense, limited. So, according to Kant, we can't know if a table exists exactly as we perceive it or if it has properties beyond